Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation today. It's wonderful to see so many people from all over the world saying hello in the chat. My name is Catherine Whitaker, and I am the Global Director Online Learning at the British Council. And I'm here with my colleague Shivangi Gupta, who is a Head of Partnerships at English Online, also at the British Council. We're going to be talking today about organizations and whether online learning is a game changer for them. You'll note a very intentional question mark at the end of our talk title. What we're going to do, though, is share insights from our own experience delivering English Online, which is the British Council's flagship online learning platform with a suite of courses. But we very much want to hear from you and your experience and your opinions. And my colleague Shivangi is going to explain how that works.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. If you have questions today, I will be keeping an eye on the questions. So please put your questions at the bottom of your screen in the Q&A section. There will be polls that pop up from time to time for you to take part in, and we may ask you questions to respond to in the chat. And of course, if you have any technical issues, the ELTons team are here to help you in the chat. Back to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Shivangi. So the very first thing we're going to ask you to do, in fact, is to take part in a poll. So we have a series of statements, and we're going to ask you whether you agree or disagree. So the first statement is, online learning is not as effective as in-person classroom learning. Do you agree or disagree? So when we have some results, they'll appear on the screen. Disagree, but not a huge percentage, a 60-40 split. That's interesting. Well, I think we're definitely going to be looking at this topic and perhaps showing those who disagree that it can be as effective. But let's see. This is an interesting result. Definitely not a majority opinion there. Not a big majority anyway. And we're going to move on to the next question. Next statement, which is, without a digital component, your program is not as attractive to participants. Do you agree or disagree? Great. If we can take a look at the results on this one. That's interesting. So here we have a much bigger majority in agreement. And the question here is really what your stakeholders are expecting. So what your students, what your employees, anyone you're providing training to is expecting. And it's interesting to see that you feel that they are expecting a digital component as part of your course offers. So next question, which is, scale for learning and development, L&D programs, comes at the cost of quality and return on investment. Can you be big and still give quality to your students? Agree or disagree? And can we see the results for this poll, please? Well, there we go. We have a majority of feeling that that is possible, and that's good to see. And we will certainly be talking again about how we think that scale does not have to. Sorry, I'm misinterpreting the results. Scale comes at the cost of quality and ROI. Well, we are hoping to show you that it doesn't have to. So the majority of people who feel that there is a price to pay, maybe will convince you that that's not always the case. And final statement for your thoughts, please. Thank you so much for your engagement. This is a hot topic of the day. If there's no AI, there's no engagement. Do you agree or disagree with that? And let's see the results for that one. So AI is not the only way of providing engagement at the moment for students, but we do have a small percentage of people, 14% of people, who think that you have to have AI in these days in order to provide some engagement. So that's really interesting. So that's the end of our poll. And we're going to move on now to share some of our experience. But thank you very much for giving us a sense of your thoughts on some of the topics that we're going to be covering today. So the first question or that I want to answer is, why is online learning the fastest growing part of learning and development? Now, I'm going to start from speaking about this question from the organization's perspective. I think for organizations, it is very much the case that online learning is a game changer for all these overlapping reasons here on my graphic. And I'm going to go into every one of them and explain what we mean by these different areas. So first of all, simplified operations at scale. the wonderful thing about a learning platform is it can do a lot of the heavy lifting in the background while humans can focus on ensuring that the quality of learning is there. So what do we mean by heavy lifting or operations? Well, online learning allows us to not just onboard tens or hundreds of students, but thousands or even tens of thousands of students at the same time. It can do some of that automatable work, like checking that the learning has been delivered. Has the teacher shown up to class? Are the people who are signed up to the program actually engaging with the program? It can deliver the ability to collect feedback at micro touch points. So for example, after every single live class, you could be checking whether students found the class useful or not. And it can automate communication, for example, in response to learner behavior. And if you are operating at this kind of scale, one of the most helpful things is it generates a huge amount of data. And that data can then inform your decisions about what you provide for your students in the future. It can give you insights into how effective the learning that you're delivering is. And we, for example, have one client where we have 80,000 students are accessing the learning program. So we really are talking about a kind of game changer in terms of the size of provision that is possible online. Obviously, that enormous scale means increased reach, but it also means flexibility. So for example, if you have workers or students or any kind of stakeholder who are not in the same place at the same time, then online learning is a wonderful solution. You might have shift workers or people who don't ever come into the office because they're fully remote, or people who are not in the same country. And of course, that is very easily resolved through online learning. We have a client, Santander, the bank Santander, who uses online learning to deliver a scholarship program to students in 3 different continents, 12 or 13 countries at the same time. Now, there are 2 reasons why that's very powerful. One is, of course, it allows students, because we have students coming into class from lots of different locations, to study together. And the feedback that we receive is that that's an extremely useful way of improving students' intercultural knowledge, but also their linguistic skills. They're used to working with people from different kinds of backgrounds, different mother tongues, for example. And it also means that they get a kind of polish that it's not possible to get if you're only talking to people from your own country or your own language group, where you're hearing some of the same perhaps accents or linguistic errors that language group tend to make. So very useful in terms of intercultural communication. And I have to say, in our fractured world today, I think that's a really important point, and it's absolutely at the heart of what the British Council's work is across the globe. And you will hear more in other sessions today, I'm sure, about how we facilitate that cross-cultural communication. The other reason why this is so important is that it allows standardization. So if you are delivering a program in lots of different places, perhaps using a patchwork of providers, they're not necessarily all the same experience for students. And what we can provide online is the ability for that standardization. So you can see if you've got perhaps poorer results in one country or amongst one group of students, you can analyze why that is happening, rather than assuming that it's perhaps something to do with those different provisions that are going on in different places. Now, you might think that personalization is a bit of if you've got standardization, you can't have personalization, but with a flexible program, you can. You can give students the option of when they study, how frequently they study, how intensively they study, and also perhaps what order they look at the materials, and also whether they want to go into more detail on a certain topic based on their own needs. Obviously, all these factors, the scale, the reach, the ability to operate in the same way in different places, and automating functions that perhaps in the past would have to have been done by a human, can reduce cost, reduced cost, bigger reach, students who are more engaged because they're in control of their learning, that can have a huge business impact as well. So I hope I've convinced those of you who weren't sure about the benefits of online learning for organizations that there are some very, very good reasons why online learning can be a fantastic option. But what about for students? Does this operating at scale actually help them? And I could see some skepticism in our poll results about whether student outcomes are as effectively served by these online learning programs. There is a bit of a COVID hangover, I think, and I wonder if some of you were bringing that experience in your answers. Obviously, during the pandemic, there was an emergency response. People had to rush online to deliver programs that hadn't been designed for that purpose, and therefore they were kind of repackaged to be delivered online, which perhaps wasn't making full use of the technology and the affordances of the learning environment online. Sometimes, though, there were no teachers involved and it was completely self-serve, and that lack of guidance could lead to loss of motivation. I think also we need to be really careful that even now, post-COVID, and even with a lot of people having had that experience, there are gaps in digital skills. We don't assume that everyone has the necessary digital skills to access an online language learning program, and we do need to do learner training. We also need to, even with people who do have high levels of digital skills, encourage them to develop digital study skills and help work out what that means for their cadence of study and what works best for them in terms of their language needs. So we try very much to get over that poor learner motivation that we saw during COVID. I think at the other end of this spectrum, though, there are now services and tools which focus almost entirely on motivation and engagement and have a lot of focus on gamification and making sure that students come back. But I think we still have to ask that same question, which is, are students learning? Are they able to deploy the language that they're meeting in real life in different situations and in the situations that they need to get on with? So I'm going to talk about two case studies, two quite different case studies, in fact. The first one is a large-scale program that we've been involved in. There will have been 13,000 students, more than 13,000 students on this program over the course of 18 months when it finishes next year. It is a very intensive program. Students come to us and they study 2 hours of live classes every day over 10 weeks. And in this case study, what students do is they have a flipped learning design. So that means they come to class having met some activities beforehand. I'll talk more about that later. And they do a test at the beginning and at the end of the course, a similar test to assess how effective the learning has been. And we have students from A1 to C1 level. So keep all that in mind, because I'm going to ask you a question, a bit of a guess in your case. There was one single factor that impacted three things. It impacted, on this program, course completion, bridging the attainment gap between low-level and high-level language learners. So we know that students starting to learn a language often make much faster progress than those who have been learning it for many years. And there was another factor that influenced the exit test attainment, so how well they did in that final test. I'd like you to guess what you think it was and answer put your answers in the chat, and Shivangi is going to come and tell us what people are saying about what that one factor might have been. Shivangi, when you're ready, you can share some of the answers that we're seeing, and perhaps some of the things that we guessed.
People are saying feedback, quality of the teachers, exit test, bridging the attainment gap, so differentiation. I think we've got some English teachers in our group today, which is really interesting. Great. Interesting to see feedback there. So I think we've got somebody on the right track at least. And the answer was class attendance. So class attendance was the single biggest factor in the ability for students to see the course all the way through, to get to that exit test and to do well in it, and also to bridge that gap. So we saw
the class attendance had really good impact on higher level language learners, as well as people starting to learn English or carrying on their English language learning journey at a lower level. So we'll talk a bit about those classes in a minute, but I just wanted to share a different case, very different case study with you. Now, in this situation, which was with the International Islamic University in Malaysia, which is a preeminent state university, far fewer students. So here we're talking more like 100 students. So we didn't have that enormous data set to do all that interesting data analysis on. But we had a similar output for the program, which is that students were learning English for employability. They had a very specific achievement that they needed to get to. They were trying to target either B2 or a C level. And what we had in our program design was another online course, this time a very, very different amount of contact time. So students were only having one lesson a week because they needed the flexibility. They were working on their degree courses and they couldn't come for 2 hours a day over 10 weeks. Obviously, budgets have an impact on how much time students get in front of teacher as well. But in this case, they had to fit in other studying. And then we gave them some exam preparation, and they, yeah, as I said, the output in this case was a high stakes British Council aptitude test. So again, we were ensuring that students had live teaching as part of the program design, and we were really, really pleased with the results that we had all but one test taker achieve a B2, 66% of them achieved C1 or C2, and 60% of all test takers showed a whole CFR level improvement in their test results. But how was this achieved? Well, we'll come back to some of the feedback on this program in a minute, but it was really clear from that. In this case, we used qualitative rather than quantitative feedback because we had far fewer data points to look at. But it was really interesting to see that once again, it was the online classes that were the focus of that feedback. So when I say that online classes are effective, and we can see that through data and feedback, I want to talk a bit about what an effective online class looks like. And just before I go into that, I do want to flag another talk today that's happening with my colleagues, Catherine and Ashleisha, and they are going to be talking about this from the student's perspective, what you didn't know about online learning. So if you want to hear more about the methodology in these classes, you can also join that talk later. But just to give you an idea about what we mean, we're using a flipped model, which I think many of you will be familiar with, but we really find it works particularly well in the live online context, because what it means is we can use that precious class time for that feedback, that input from the teacher that we've been talking about. But it's really important, two things really important. One is that the classes are part of a program of study. We're not turning up and teaching and just seeing what students feel like on the day. We are asking students to come to class prepared for that experience. So in preparation for the class, they meet the language, they understand the context in which it's going to be used, and they're ready. And then the teacher is there as an expert guide to facilitate communication. In our group classes, as I've mentioned, huge benefit of having students from different places who can support each other, and there's a lot of peer learning that goes on as well, and that live feedback that we've identified as really important to success. And then after class, equally important that students go away and consolidate their learning, and they reflect and review. We found that this approach encourages autonomy because students are in charge of coming to class ready with the language that they need to put into practice. There are lots of opportunities for practice because we're not using class time to do any input. It's ready to go. And because there's this scaffolding and students are able to deploy that language effectively, that's a huge confidence boost for our learners as well. So just to come back to the example from the University in Malaysia, I won't read the whole quote, but this is one of our students making the point that in a live class, what they have come away with is the understanding that it doesn't matter if you make a mistake. It doesn't matter if you're not perfect. Actually, if you're in a live situation with real humans, you are getting your message across. And that's the most important thing. So, and that's a lesson that they've come to from that live class experience. And then another piece of feedback, this time from a lecturer of one of the students in our class, again pointing to the importance of that large language, that live language experience, and how important the mentor is in guiding students to learn the language and to check in on their progress and provide that support. So I think the point that I'd really like to make about the student experience is that while at the start of the presentation I was talking about all the benefits of scale and from the organisation's point of view, what we've tried very much to do, and British Council is obviously an expert teaching organisation, is to ensure that students don't feel like they're on a massive programme. They actually have an experience that is small, bespoke, and very much about them. So you can have 100, 300, 3,000 students in the same program, but that individual student is still getting the support that they need to make huge progress in their English language learning journey. That's what I really wanted to take you through before answering your questions. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm going to hand over to Shvangi, who's been carefully monitoring the chats and the Q&A, and we'll take as many of your questions as we can before the end of our session.
Thanks, Catherine, for the great session. We have a few interesting questions that have already come through. Thank you to those who shared it. So a couple of questions which are kind of talking about similar themes. Let's take them together. Online learning is a wonderful idea, but what to do when more than 90% students don't have access to online platforms? And then someone from Pakistan who said that online learning is good but not working in Pakistan. The reasons are there isn't a proper internet connection available or lack of awareness of online class mechanisms. Catherine, I wonder if you want to say something before I give my view on this.
Yeah, I mean, one way around this is often mobile networks. So often there's a difference between internet penetration and the ability to join a learning environment through a mobile phone. So that's certainly something that we didn't launch initially, the full experience on mobile, but that's something that we are working very hard on at the moment, actually. And that's one of the reasons why, is that we know, not just because of internet penetration difficulties, but also because in reality, people are not online on their laptop or carrying their desktop around with them, they're carrying their phone around with them. So if you want students to engage, you need to give them as many opportunities to come in, whether that's using a laptop or a mobile phone. So that can be one way round. And obviously providers often have both an app and a web version of their offers. But Shvangi, I'm sure you have thoughts too.
Yeah, I would just only add like an example from one of our very large scale programs where we are working with disadvantaged groups, and one of our partners has actually invested in loaning them devices and making sure they have access to stable internet connection. So especially working with groups that may not have that level of access, thinking of accessibility is often useful and perhaps cheaper than doing something on the ground in any case. So that's another way of looking at it. There's lots of questions coming, so I want to keep moving. A very interesting one: how to engage students towards self-motivated learning, as online learning often results in only few students completing their tasks.
That's always the big challenge, and it's something that we talk about probably every single day when we're looking at program design and platform design and how to ensure that students come back. I think that the things that I pointed out already is a structured program of learning. I think when students have an expectation around what they need to do, so it's a combination of sort of structure and agency, if you like. So I think if students have a sense that there is a program of study, especially if you're expecting them to turn up to a live class, that there is something they need to do in advance, and it's really clear to students what that is. You can have a lot of options, and if students can't navigate their way through them, then that's actually really demotivating. So if there's a structured program, make sure it's really clear to the student what they need to do and when and by when. But I do also think that combining that with some flexibility, so flexibility for students to choose when they learn, for example. We have in our and our platform a lot of extra additional materials as well, so that students can work on the things that they need to work on. So even with a structured program, there is additional material that is really that they can pick for themselves. So you get the best of both worlds as a kind of a structure and a sense of flexibility.
Yeah. I'll take a question very quick.
Just one other thought. I think it's not motivating if you're not learning as well. So the actual efficacy of the program is really important. You can have as many badges and whatever you like. If you're not making progress, if you don't have a sense of progress and you're not feeling that, then ultimately you will always lose people.
That's a very good point, Catherine. I'll just take a question very quickly. How to evaluate if online learning is going to be authentic and good quality? So I think if you're an organization and a learning and development manager, someone evaluating different types of learning providers, do query them about their quality, how they're, what kind of qualifications their teachers have, what kind of quality assurance mechanisms they have, and academic management approaches they have. And of course, look at the flexibility and the functionality of the platform. Do also focus on if the provider has built-in safeguarding and other accessibility for learners. So that shows the provider is putting the learner front and center, and they're not cutting corners on things that are actually very important. So I think those are some of the things. And then if you're evaluating something for yourself, of course, you can read about that, but do try out, if the provider has free trials or explore ways to explore their platform, do try it out before investing in something. So that's how I would approach it. All right, this is an interesting one. Could you talk a bit more about the flipped model and could give some steps that should be followed for a successful session? I think it'll be answered later in the evening session, but Catherine, you might want to say something now.
Yeah, so I think if you think about traditional learning, you might have a 90-minute class, for example. In a face-to-face setting, you might have a 90-minute class. Sometimes I've been to training sessions that are 2 hours long. We know that online, that's a very long time. Therefore, there are two reasons. There's the issue of being in front of a screen for too long, and then also, obviously, as I mentioned, the live teacher time, that's the expensive time. So you want to make the absolute maximum use of that live teacher time. And what an online program allows you to do is put the preparation materials in front of the students before they come to class. So the input that you might have taken the first 20 minutes of a face-to-face language class, you don't need to do it that way. You can make sure that students are ready, so that when you come to class, it's straight into an activity. So we might have a warmer just to introduce people, just to get people ready, but we'll go straight into an activity that will deploy the language that they have met in some activities before they've come to class. And that way we can really keep the focus of class time on communication, not just between the teacher and student, as I mentioned, but between students themselves in a group class setting as well. It is important, as I said during the presentation, that there is a structured program. So it is a lot of work in terms of syllabus design and lesson plan preparation to ensure that those pre-class activities, the class activities and the post-class activities all work together. So there is an enormous amount of thought that goes into the program design before you get into delivery. And that's something that is really important. As I mentioned, it doesn't work to turn up and teach and wing it on the day. The flip model requires a program that's been carefully thought through, so that you can be sure that when you are using that class time, students are ready. I hope that gives a little bit more detail, Rich. Maggie.
Thanks, Catherine. That was really comprehensive. I'll take a quick question. Some digital platforms and tools that we use for online teaching. So we have our own platform, and we have really thought about the kind of experience from a point of view of learners, from our teachers, and also from the point of view of administrators. And for delivery of live classes, we integrate with Zoom and use Zoom as our live class platform. So that hopefully answers your question. This is another interesting one, how to bridge the gap between young learners and online learning.
Well, at the moment, the experiences that we've been sharing have all been for adults. Some young, people who are just adults, but 18 and over. Shivangi's already mentioned one of the most important factors, and that is safeguarding. I have previous experience working with young learners, and it is absolutely critical that every aspect of safeguarding is thought through. It is possible to do. It's possible to provide a safe online platform and a safe virtual classroom, but it is absolutely essential that that's thought through and designed in from the start. There are different challenges with young learners, and we know that certainly, I think post-COVID, you'll have seen that the acceptance of online learning is very high now for adult learners, but there is still a lot to be gained for students meeting each other and socializing and having that kind of interaction in person when they're still building up the social skills that they need in order to interact in the future, potentially online. So I think it's possible to provide a good language learning environment for young learners. Very different set of challenges, and I think we've seen that also parents are not always as keen on the online environment as they might be if they were looking for something for an older teenager or an adult.
Thanks, Catherine. This is a very interesting question, something that I talk to clients kind of quite regularly. How can you assure that students really learn from the online class, especially during the assessment part? And very interestingly, next week, we're going to be talking about that in one of our webinars. So if you hear about it on LinkedIn, do come, but I'll give you a short answer. I think kind of going back to what Catherine was saying, that the program has to be really well thought out. So what is the purpose of assessment? At what points do you need checks? That needs to come through in the program design. And we very often say you have to test what you teach. So your assessment and your program need to talk to each other. So if people are, for instance, preparing for an IELTS test, for instance, it's really important for them to familiarize with the test format as well as improve their English. So there's an element of IELTS test prep required as well. That's why we have a separate IELTS coach course. But in a general or a business English course, there are many ways in which you can check things. So one is checking the input, make sure that there is a quality assurance program around the delivery of the teaching, and you're obtaining feedback at those micro touch points, checking the outputs and making sure that students are going to class, they're completing their exercises, and you're taking steps and intervening to course correct if you see a drop in engagement, and find out why there might be a drop in engagement, and then finally measuring outcomes. So you can do it, you have to make sure that the lesson is designed, the teacher is providing feedback to students during class, and there are other ways in which students are receiving feedback. It could be when they're doing their online exercises, they get a score. It could be other ways. But then you could have certain points in the course where the student takes an assessment to check what they have learned, in a module or a theme, as a progress check before they move forward. And it can be done both in a structured program and flexibly as well, which we do quite successfully. So I think it's really thinking about the syllabus and the program design at the outset, rather than assessment being an afterthought. This is a question that we get all the time. So will the course be cost effective for learners? The short answer is online learning often is more cost effective, given the obvious reasons. You don't have to kind of send people to different locations. You don't have to pay for a premises. You do have to pay for a platform, but perhaps it's not as expensive, and it is definitely more scalable. You can replicate the instance for tens of thousands of learners. But there are different models that online learning affords. So you can study in a fully self-access mode, or you can deliver a primarily self-access program if your budget allows for only that, provided the program has that kind of learning design and content structure backing it. And it's not just a set of grammar exercises, it's giving people English or the language they're learning in the context that they will be using it. And then within the flipped model, today we saw, what Catherine described, where you can have a high intense live learning model versus sort of a model which has low intensity live learning as well. So you can have different combinations of flipped learning. And then
Shivangi, I've noticed one question, which is something that might be interesting to touch on, given that we have teachers in the audience, and that's about whether you need special skills to be an online teacher. I think that's a very interesting question. I think there is a slightly different set of skills that you need to teach online, but a lot of fantastic classroom teachers will also make fantastic online teachers. You obviously need to work a little bit harder to make sure that students are engaged, and classroom management is a very different discipline. It does require somebody who has some tech confidence, because things can go wrong. As I've noticed in the chat, people are talking about connectivity a lot. That can be an issue, and you need to be able to not get phased and manage. The classroom management is around overcoming some of those issues and ensuring that everyone's contributing. So it's just I would say it's a lot of the same skills, but delivered slightly differently. And there are training programs which go into this. There's research. One of my colleagues has done some research on this as well. And if you're interested in becoming an online teacher, I would definitely take a look at some of those training programs and some of the research on this, because I think it's a conversion process. I think there are lots of people who have got fantastic classroom skills who will make fantastic online teachers, but I wouldn't recommend just going straight into it without becoming aware of what some of those skills are. And if you are making that change, then I really wish you well. Shivani, we've got about 2 minutes left, so if there are any maybe one final question. And so, by the way, I just want to say before we take that question, thank you so much for the levels of engagement. It's been really wonderful to see all the different comments and questions coming in. And sorry we haven't been able to get to all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many questions. I would just say that there's a couple of questions asking about specific programs that we can deliver. Please do get in touch with me. You can find out my contact with the session organizers, and I'll be happy to talk one-to-one or put you in touch with the right colleagues. There's a very interesting question. Online learning helps immensely, but are there alternatives in terms of low price quality courses available? Because what I've seen is quite expensive. I will say that if you look at some of the flexible options out there and you explore different modes of learning, self-study as well as live, you may be able to access some flexible learning outcomes that don't require commitment for a very long period. So you can commit to as much as you can afford at the moment. And there's also tons of free resources that the British Council makes available. Our Learn English website is one of the most popular education websites in the world. So please do go see that. And there's no, there's no replacement for really immersing yourself in a language, talking to people, practicing your language. So, you can do a lot on your own as well as in a structured course. And there are so many other questions. I don't know if we have time,
but unfortunately we are out of time, Shivangi. So I think it's over to you to close us up, and just a final thank you from me for sharing your thoughts and for listening so attentively.
Thanks a lot, Catherine, for such an interactive session, and to our audience for all your wonderful questions. In a minute, you'll see a pop-up survey. Please take a couple of minutes to share your thoughts. It'll really help us. And up next, you'll be heading back to the festival platform for Future of English Trends and Challenges ahead.